What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be going over all of the buttons and features on the back and top of your camera. We're not getting into the settings. We're just getting into all of the buttons so that you can better understand how to use your Canon R series camera. This applies to literally any Canon R series camera, not the cinema series like the R5C, but basically the R100 all the way up to the R1. However, the R3 and R1 might have some extra buttons or settings that you'll probably never see in any of these or ever in general because they're very niche and specific cameras. Also, keep in mind that some of these cameras are a little bit different than one another. You know, some of them have dials, some of them have screens. However, all of the buttons I'm going over today should in some way, shape, or form be on your camera. Some of them may be missing one or two, but generally you'll be able to learn a little bit about these cameras so that if you do upgrade in the future, you'll know exactly what those buttons do so that you can get straight to taking photos or videos. It's going to be a whole series we're making about how to use your camera, your Canon camera specifically. We'll get into the menus and all of the other stuff in future videos, so stick around and hit that subscribe button. Other than that, let's just get straight to it and teach you a little bit about these cameras. All right, so we're gonna start with the back of the camera here. This is where most of the buttons are you're going to be pressing to change stuff. The top of your camera is more or less things you change settings to take photos or video and things like that. And just keep in mind that every single one of these is basically customizable to an extent. So let's start with the top of the camera over here. The first button you have is a rate button, and it also has a microphone symbol next to it. So what that does is it allows you to rate a photo you take with your camera. So I have a photo here of what it sees in front of me. If I hit it once, you'll see that it rated it 1 star. You can also rate it 2, 3, 4, and 5 stars. After that, it'll have no rating, so it turns it off. You can also press and hold down this button to record a voice memo if you want to remember something specific about the photo or video you just shot. And also, the way I got into this is by hitting this little play button down here. It can be oriented in a different spot like I mentioned earlier, but basically to get in and out of what you've taken pictures of or to see what you've taken a video of, this is a little play button down here. And that's a pretty straightforward button because it's got the play symbol on it. Now, while we're in these settings, you can also hit the trash button, and what that will do is you can select to erase the photo or cancel if you don't want to erase it. The next button up top here is your menu button. This is a completely different video that I will be going over, but this is all of your camera settings when you're in either photo or video mode. They are different, so keep that in mind. So that is a button that we'll go over in a future video to make sure we go over every single menu item in a Canon R. After that button, we have the right side of the camera, which will start on the top and go down. So the first, I won't call it a button, is this dial right here. This is for if you have corrective lenses or you wear glasses or anything like that, you can actually turn this dial. Depending on what your eyesight looks like, what you would do is focus your camera on an object and turn that until it's in focus for you as well. And this allows you to not wear your lenses or wear your contacts or anything like that while you're taking photos. If you use your contacts or glasses while taking photos, there is a little notch on most cameras that shows you where the center of this needs to be. And you'll just center that on the little notch that's right here. And that means it's at the normal spot that it needs to be. Also keep an eye on that because it can sometimes get bumped and you want to make sure that everything's always in focus. The notable mention here is this little thing here. This is basically just a sensor. This is what recognizes when you put your camera next to your face so it turns off the viewfinder if you have your settings set to do that. Next we have this 8-way button basically. So what this is a dial that you can go up, down, left, right, diagonal, whatever, and also press it in. So it's a button and it uses to move things. So what you would use this button for, or dial, or whatever you want to call it, is for one, you can move your autofocus point. Depending on what kind of autofocus you have turned on, it may have the ability to be moved. So you can move your autofocus back and forth, up and down, wherever you need to move it. You can also just click and drag it on your screen, but that's the physical button that we're going over today. You can also press it in to center your focus so that it goes back to the center of your screen. You can also use this in the menu to go over left, right, up, down in your menu settings, and then you can press on things to go over settings. The next option here is this button right next to it. It says AF-on. That stands for autofocus on. And what this will normally do by default is it acts as the same thing as if you half press your shutter. So what that will do is it'll focus your camera and not take a photo. So it's a really common thing for photographers to use this and then also take a photo with their shutter button. This way they can focus on what they want and then take a photo and it won't refocus. And that's something you have to set up specifically in your camera, but that's what it's mainly used for, because by default, if you half press the shutter button, which we'll go over, it will focus, and if you full press it, it will take a photo. But this button does the same thing as far as focusing on the point that it's focused on. So wherever your camera is focused, if you hit the button, it will focus on whatever that point is on. If you're on eye tracking or face tracking or something like that, it will move around and find the person it wants to focus on, and that will focus on a person. So that is the autofocus button in a nutshell. The next button we have is this little asterisk or star button up top. Basically, this is something you probably won't use super often. It's called auto exposure lock, which locks your exposure even if you're changing scenes and things so that your exposure stays the same. This next button over here has like a little square with some dots in it or some other squares. Basically what that allows you to do is change what setting of autofocus you have enabled without having to go to a different settings in your menu. It's just a quick way to change a setting essentially so that you can change your autofocus mode, whether you're on your screen here or if you're looking through the viewfinder, it will allow you to use your joystick to change things or your dials. So it's a way to not have to pull yourself away from your camera and change quick settings so that you can get your photo shoots done very efficiently. The next really awesome one that I really like to use a lot, especially for video, is this magnifying button. And what this will do is will zoom in to your object and you can hit it again and it'll zoom in again. And the reason I like this is because it allows you to move around and see what's in focus and what's not in focus. So this will allow you to see if your image or person is in focus if you are shooting a manual focus or a manual focus lens, or if you just want to check focus real quick or make sure that your photo's in focus, because this also works when you're looking at your photo in preview. So it's a cool feature to be able to look and zoom in on your camera. My next favorite button, actually my most favorite button to be honest, is this Q button. Sometimes it's a Q, sometimes it's a Q with a box, and sometimes the button doesn't even exist on your camera, or it could be part of your set button here. But basically what that allows you to do is change all of the settings you could probably need to on a photo shoot all in one space. So I can change my white balance, I can change my picture profile, I can change if I'm full frame or cropped, I can change my metering mode, my drive mode if I want to shoot a lot of pictures at a short period of time. I can change which SD card gets what type of photo, whether it's a RAW or JPEG, and autofocus modes and a bunch of other things that are in there. It's a really, really, really fast and effective way to change your settings, and it's really cool. So feel free to use this instead of having to go all the way into your menu and changing your settings manually, because that takes forever. This is a really fast way to change your stuff. And this also looks differently or works differently depending on what screen you're on. So if you are on a screen that looks like this and you hit Q, it allows the boxes to become active so you can just select them through the boxes. But I would imagine that most people are using a screen that looks similar to this one so that you can see what's on your screen and not, only have to look through your viewfinder. Which brings me to my next button, which is the info button. Info basically gives you different sets of information on your screen whenever you press it. So this is the default screen that I would say most people use. It shows you your shutter, your aperture, your metering, and your ISO. And then you also have a magnifying glass, which is cool. But basically what info will do if I hit it next is it shows me a lot more information. As you can see, it shows me those same settings that if I hit Q, that I can change. However, I can't change them here. I can just see what they're set at. This is a really quick and easy screen to get to be able to make sure you're in the right settings before you start shooting. So that's why it's beneficial to have this screen. The next one is one of my other favorites because it shows you a level. I wish I could have a level on other screens because it also shows me a histogram, but this will show you a level, a histogram, and the rest of the settings that you're currently using on your camera to be able to see if your camera's level. This is great if you're on a tripod without a bubble level or anything like that for real estate photos and other things, but that's great. And the last one is this right here. It shows you literally nothing. It just shows you the autofocus point and you can recenter it and then that goes away and that's it. And that's the last, I should say, one that shows you information on the screen. The last thing is a screen just full of your information on your settings, and it doesn't show you what your camera sees. You would have to look through the viewfinder here to be able to see that. But this is the main menus when you hit info, and info does have one other beneficial setting that you can use it for, but we'll get into that when we talk about the buttons up here. The next thing down here is your scroll wheel, and this scroll wheel is a pretty versatile scroll wheel. Basically, you can use it when you're in your menu to go up and down. You can use it when you're hitting Q to go to different settings. When you're in this mode, it changes to different options. So it really just has different features and functions depending on what screen you're on. But it's literally just a way to scroll through stuff. Example, like your photos or videos. If you want to fastly scroll through everything, then that's a good way to do that. But other than that, you have your set button, which is basically an OK button. But that is really all of the buttons you will see on the front of your camera, or I guess this is technically the back, whatever you want to call it. And those are how you use each one of those settings. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the top of the camera here, which is where you're probably going to be using most of, but you're probably going to be using them subconsciously and not constantly looking at them. All right, so now we are on the top of the camera here. This is where a majority of the buttons you're going to be using are. So a few things to note here. One is that your on-off button over here is on the R5. However, on some cameras, there's a little switch right here to flip it on and off. Also, other cameras may not have a little digital screen here. They may have a dial that you can twist that shows different settings, such as putting it in video mode, photo mode, aperture priority, and more. Basically, it'll show you the same things as you see here on the screen, except for it will be over here in dial form. So that's basically the differences in some of the cameras. So keep in mind it will look slightly different on some cameras, but basically every camera should have similar features as you're seeing here. So the first and most important button is your shutter button. That is right here. I talked about this one earlier to a point where if you do half press it in, it will focus the photo for you. And then a full press in will take a photo for you. And so that's basically how you take photos. You can go in your menu and change it so that this button does only take photos and the half press won't do a focus. And then you can rely on your AF on button over here, just like I mentioned earlier. The next item here is going to be your scroll wheel. This is going to be a very important scroll wheel, which changes your shutter speed by default. So going up or down will change your shutter, which will make an image darker or lighter. But by default, this is generally going to be your shutter. You're more than welcome to alter this and customize it, but that is probably going to be everyone's favorite for shutter speed. This is also used to go through menu items and stuff. So on the next option here is your M-FN button. When you press this button in certain modes like video mode, it allows you to change your white balance. So I can change it by using my shutter wheel. Or if I use this other scroll wheel, I can go over to ISO and then change ISO. So basically what this allows you to do is change quickly your ISO or white balance just using this button and these two scroll wheels. And the reason you might do this is to be able to change settings on the go while you're looking through your viewfinder, so you don't have to pull your camera away from your body to change settings manually on the screen here. It's basically just a way to be super efficient and change things that you may need to change on the fly very fast. ISO is generally something you'll change quite often. So I have this dial custom set up to always mess with my ISO. So I don't have to hit the MFN button. I can just change it by dialing that dial. However, by default, that's not always the case. So you have to set it up as a custom function, but we'll go over that in the menu features of this camera. So the next button here, pretty straightforward. It has a red dot on it. That's basically your record button. You press that button to start recording on your camera, and that's what it does for video. It will work in both video mode and photo mode. It just won't copy your settings from video mode into photo mode when you hit record, so keep that in mind. The next button here, this is a little light button icon. So basically, if you press this button once, it will show you something different on this screen. For me, it only shows me two different things. If I press and hold it down, it lights up the screen so that you can see it if it's dark out or something like that, or if you're unable to see it while you're shooting. It only stays on for about 6 seconds, but it will do the job. This next button here is the lock button. You can press this button here and it will lock your controls. So you're now unable to make changes to your settings. You see it says locked down here. So that way, if you are like shooting and you set this camera down on your side or on a strap, it won't accidentally change your settings to when you go take photos again, you accidentally take photos in the wrong settings. So that's a lock button you can use. You press it again to unlock the controls and you're pretty good to go from there. Now, lastly is this mode button. Now, not all the cameras in the R lineup have this because they'll have this little dial up here, but the mode button basically allows you to change between different custom modes you set up as well as just regular modes like manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, and things like that. Basically, if you need to change from video to photo or photo to video, you can hit this little info button down here. It'll change it over to photo, hit it again, changes over to video. Or you can hit mode and then the info button on the back side of the camera, and that will do the same thing. So that's the other beneficial use of the info button that I mentioned earlier. The last thing to mention here is going to be the aperture wheel on your lens. So it's either going to come on your lens if you have an RF lens, or it'll be on an adapter that you put on your lens if you have an EF or Sigma lens or something like that. And that's only if you do buy the adapter that has that on it. There is one that doesn't. But if you do have a camera lens or a adapter that has this little textured scroll wheel, you can also customize this to do whatever you want. But for me, and by default, it's usually aperture. It'll usually change your aperture. So the reason that we like this is because basically this will change your aperture and then your other two wheels will change your shutter and ISO. So you have all three things that you need to change on your camera, easily accessible by just using 3 different fingers, and you're good to go to change settings. So that's really it as far as all of the buttons go on the camera. That's it for today's video. Hopefully this helped you understand how to use your camera buttons and camera a little bit better, and I'll see you guys on the next one.